Hello once again, cohorts of the Collection Chamber. I hope you all had a suitably jovial Christmas and a very happy New Year's. It's been a while, but I'm back with a selection of games that once again have been given the chance to see the light of day. Over the festive period, I got 15 lost classics and compilations working again, which you can check out on the Collection Chamber website. Out of the 15, I've selected 5 to talk about today. They're a mixture of my personal favourites and the most interesting of the bunch. But don't let my ramblings convince you they're worth a play. Check them out for yourself now that you can.
Construction complete.
We begin with Dune 2000, Westwood Studios' kinda remake, kinda sequel to the genre-creating real-time strategy game Dune II. Even though it's got 2000 in its name, it was actually released in 1998, amongst a sandstorm of hype in the gaming press. Dune II was reaching its 5th anniversary by then, and its legendary, genre-defining status in the gaming world was second only to that other early 90s game beginning with a D, Doom. A lot has changed since the original came out, most notably Westwood's own Command & Conquer refining the mechanics, and because of that, the Dune II remake was developed for that engine. Graphically, the game got a huge facelift. Sprites and background art are far more detailed, making the not-too-shabby original seem like a barren wasteland by comparison. The presentation is also a lot sleeker, with FMV video and a much-appreciated overhaul of the graphical interface. The gameplay is pretty much the same: mine spice to build facilities, manufacture vehicles and train soldiers in a bid to take over an opponent's land. By virtue of new technology and the new engine, scenarios and maps now offer a far greater variety. You can now see cliffs, bridges and other terrain types beyond desert that make you think more about navigation, which alters each stage just enough to make them feel brand new. The biggest and best difference, however, is in the interface. You can now select up to 50 units at once, a far cry from the one of the original. This isn't a troop you send into a fight, but an army deployed into battle. Enemies and scenarios have been drastically tweaked to account for this. They are tougher, more aggressive, and more plentiful, and more fun as a result. Upon release, Dune 2000 wasn't so well received. 3D graphics were making their mark at this time, and when put aside screenshots of other strategic heavyweights like Dark Reign or Populous the Beginning, which also released that same year, it looked archaic by comparison. Looking back at it with over 2 decades of hindsight, both games should be considered classics. Dune 2000 remains one of the most enjoyable RTS games of its type, and I doubt anyone who actually plays it would disagree.
Let's go! Commander. Orders, sir? Yes, sir. For the Duke.
This is the dwarf. He's slow but packs a real punch. Try for a headshot and keep moving.
The next game sees a psychotically stereotyped Russian soldier piloting a bloody great robot in Krazy Ivan. Made by Psygnosis, it's an action mech shooter whose titular protagonist has a pathological disregard for safety. He's bored of waiting for his 40-ton mech suit to be deployed, so he overrides launch procedures and immediately blasts off into battle. The entire world has been overrun by sentience, alien mechanoids sent to subjugate humanity. Beginning in the motherland, Ivan must travel the world to destroy the occupying aliens and save the world from enslavement. Naturally, this is done by blowing up the bastards, each of whom pilot some very varied machines. Somehow, the aliens chose monkeys, cheetahs, and squid, among other animals, to base their death bots on. Even standard bipeds that wouldn't look out of place in a Mech Warrior or Earth Siege games looks impressive for the time. The gameplay loop is fairly simple. You have 3 minutes on each map to hunt down and destroy 3 imposing mechs. Essentially, these are boss fights during which the countdown pauses, so you can take your time bombarding them with projectiles. On the way to each of them, smaller tanks and hovercraft spawn in, leaving power-ups and power-downs in their wake. The useful ones give you special missiles and other weapons, and aid in preparing before each battle. But the not so useful ones tend to play with your control, so pay attention to what you're collecting. Keep in mind that time is short, and if the counter runs down, the skies go dark, and a new robot enters the fray. This one is so legendarily tough, he's been nicknamed the Black Knight. You'll have to take him down to continue, but unless you're a Dawn of Destruction, it'll be more likely it'll kill you first. Once the 3 normal boss mechs are destroyed, you must do the same to the zonal shield generator. This looks like a spherical beating heart shielded by a spinning ring of panels. First the panels need to go, then it's all guns firing at the heart. Just be careful of the lightning and energy blasts it'll send your way. Unlike the other boss fights, the smaller droids that populate the stage will also join in, making for quite the intense end to the level. Graphically speaking, the polygons are pleasingly chunky. They're animated well and thoughtfully designed, but the technical limitations of 1996 do hold it back considerably. This was the early stages of 3D when it was just becoming the new thing for the gaming masses, so stages are shrouded in dense fog to hide popping. It helps in building atmosphere, but when you can't see the enemy until you're right on top of it, it becomes a bit of a problem. Your crosshair will turn red if it's directly in front of you, even if you can't see it, but when you have to fall back on this more often than not, it does become a bit of an issue. The controls are also a little archaic. Trying to reconfigure them to match a more modern sensibility is possible, but you'll realise pretty soon that your strafe is very limited. In fact, it isn't really a strafe at all, but a sidestep, singular. To circle your foe while keeping him in sight, frantic taps of the correct key becomes both necessary and burdensome. Despite this, it's still rather fun retro romp that deserves better than the mediocre reviews at the time. It's incredibly short, a little repetitive, and a bit on the easy side too, but regardless of your FPS skill level, Krazy Ivan is still an entertaining half hour or so.
Nice work, Commander! Watch out in the next arena, things will really start to hotten up.
Legend, or the Four Crystals of Trazere as it was known in some territories, is the second in a long-forgotten role-playing series by Peter James and Anthony Taglione. The first, Blood Witch, can be bought digitally on GOG and Steam, but subsequent games are yet to get that kind of love. It's a shame, as this standalone sequel is something special. It has just as much of a focus on puzzle solving as it does combat, with one of the most interesting spellcasting systems I've ever seen in a game. There are 4 unique members in your party: an assassin, a troubadour, and a berserker, but it's the Rune Master Wizard that's the most fascinating. He can mix runes and ingredients to create spells and cast them within the game world, mixing and matching them to do something different. The damage spell will do damage to the caster, but merge it with the missile and you have a projectile attack. Similarly, combining heal with missile will allow you to target allies to cure. These are also needed to solve some of the puzzles. For example, in the first room in the first dungeon, you have to cast 2 types of spell at 2 different spots to open 2 doors, a damage spell and a heal spell. It did take me a while, and a reread of the manual, to fully understand how the text-free spell creation screen works, but once you get there it's remarkably satisfying. Using spells in combat can be a bit troublesome too. I found most fights to be too chaotic to fully line them up. Unless you wanted to do something special like this, battles are all automatic. At least they are once you've selected the attack item at the bottom right of the screen. The Barbarian's rage ability is the most powerful here, defeating weaker foes in one hit. The Thief can hide in the shadows to stealthily attack or stay out of danger. If one of your party suffers damage, the Bard can play one of his songs to slowly heal you, though he can learn more that do different things along the way. Sometimes fights can get the better of you, and one party member will die. Picking up their bones and taking them to the temple revives them, but you'd first have to backtrack through the entire dungeon to get there, which is kind of a slog. There are many locations outside of these dungeons, each of them displayed on the overworld map. Along with the temples, you can visit cities, towns and castles. But other armies travel the land too, and if they take over a town, that location is now closed off to you. That is, unless you have the money to bribe the guard. If you're very unlucky, that occupied temple could cost you quite the sum just to keep your players alive. The grandest location is just to the west of your starting point. This castle holds the king, and it's game over if it's been taken over. You can't do much there to start with, but other nearby towns host shops, stores and taverns. all of which have interesting things to buy and tales to hear. The first place you should visit, however, is the heavily defended town called Tri-Headwell. The guild is located here, which is where you can change the colour of your costume and level up if you've got enough experience. And it is here where you can enter the cellar to explore your first dungeon too. These dungeons are the main focus of the game. Each one has multiple rooms and multiple floors that can take hours to complete, but they are fun to do so for the most part. There are even some Zelda-esque puzzles to test your brain power, as well as your understanding of the mechanics too. None that I saw are massively complex, little more than levers and keys, but their presence do a lot to keep you invested. The further you get into Legend and the more abilities you unlock, the better the game becomes. It will take you a while to finish, about 40 hours it seems, but I found the 10 or so I spent with it to be a pretty good time. If you like old school computer RPGs, I'm sure you would too. And once you're done, go play its sequel, the East Asian themed Worlds of Legend, Son of the Empire. Both come highly recommended. Outrage is a ghost of a game. Developed by NMS Software in 1998, it barely exists on the internet. There's no Moby Games page or GameFAQs entry, just some vague and contradictory speculation on the odd forum. Was this futuristic racer released, or wasn't it? Did GT Interactive have a hand in its development? And what of those references in its code to Microsoft's Windows 95 packing game Hover? All I know is that this Wipeout-inspired racer is not half bad considering its obscurity, and more words need to be spoken about its existence, so I'm going to say some. What little I did manage to find is that Outrage may have once been conceived as a sequel of sorts to Hover. Within its code, that name is referenced, along with a Microsoft copyright and the code name MD2. I've seen some speculate that this could mean Microsoft Direct 3D Example 2, and might refer to it being a showcase title or demo for DirectX 2. Under the developer's entry on Moby Games, it states that while the game went gold, it never got released thanks to the company going under in March of 1999. Then again, the copyright for this game embedded within its data says 1998, so who knows? I did find one forum member at BT Archive claiming to have the original CD that was published by GT Interactive's Value division, but he never got the packaging. A leaked copy perhaps? I found no other reference to it in GT Interactive or GT Value's back catalogue. Either way, the game itself is very much a Wipeout clone, and a fairly competently done one at that, even if it is obvious it was a budget title. There are 6 stages and their reversed alternatives which have an open world feel to them. Not only does the road ahead branch off at different times, but you can also travel away from the set track to find hidden bonuses or areas. This is where the intended budget label of the title is most obvious. Some hidden branches take far longer to race down than the obvious route, so if you ever want to get first, forget about exploring. Your hover car has to pass under checkpoints in order before you cross the finish line, and it'll become very time consuming to turn around and reach each one again if you miss any. The game does have weapons, but not really a damage system. Cars will simply slow down to a crawl if hit. The power-ups are plentiful though. Their glowing multicolour orbs scatter each stage with abundance, but they're not always placed in the most optimal of locations. Every one of these small balls have a risk attached to their reward, making their collection not entirely worth it. A little more time in the Q&A stage would have fixed this, but then again this is a budget title, or depending on what you read, a cancelled one. At higher difficulties your hover cars play more like bumper cars than anything else. This option is tied to the choice of vehicles, with 2 available for each setting. It's a kind of difficulty that feels unfair and a little broken when compared to the likes of Wipeout or Roll Cage. Those classic games managed to be insanely hard, yet it was always a test of skill and dexterity rather than patience. Outrage's lower difficulties play much better, while still retaining an adequate challenge as you speed through some interestingly designed courses. In the end, Outrage is a pretty good time, even if it's not particularly spectacular. It's fairly featureful for a budget title, and solidly polished for one that apparently never saw a release. There are a few niggles here and there, but these are ones that can easily be overlooked considering the heritage. Even if it did actually come to market, Outrage is unfairly forgotten. It deserves more of a spotlight for those who like their futuristic races, like I do. An ultimate find for an extremely hidden gem. I've spoken about Wheel of Time on this channel before. It topped my list of underappreciated first-person shooters of the 90s, and it took a while before I was satisfied with how it ran to get the full review in. But now that Amazon Prime Video has a slightly clunky but no less compelling show based on the series, it's surely time to revisit this classic. Unlike most of Legend Entertainment's other output, The Wheel of Time was a drastic departure from their usual fare. They were known for smartly written adventure games based on literary sources, such as Frederick Pohl's Gateway, Terry Brooks's Shannara, or John Saul's Blackstone Chronicles. It was around this time when GT Interactive bought the company, a move that likely instigated Legend's change in direction. This, coupled with the dwindling popularity of adventure games as a whole, and a growing friendship with one of the founders of Epic, prompted the company to go all in with the first-person shooter. At first they tested the waters with an Unreal mission pack, but The Wheel of Time was to be their first attempt at a full-length action game, keeping their ethos of literary adaptations intact. It became a big critical success, if not a big financial one, which did prove to be a disappointment for their new owners. On the back of this though, they did completely cut any remaining ties with the company's original identity and developed the action-heavy Unreal 2 before being shut down by that game's commercial failure. My very biased view on all this is that Legend's adventurous game design is not a great fit for the masses expecting a chaotic first-person shooter. This is evidenced in full force here. There are no guns, its protagonist is a very feminine woman, and it has a rich story told in lengthy pre-rendered cutscenes.
Keep her. We need your help. We tracked the assassin to this city, but found the entrance blocked by rock.
But not only this, it is also a little bit of a strategy game. The first half plunders along as you'd expect, with some well-designed if fairly linear levels populated by angry orc-like Trollocs, and the occasional puzzle. Later levels demand you know your surroundings, place traps and summon allies to give you the best opportunity to survive the incoming horde. On easy, you can pretty much ignore this feature, for the most part at least, but unless you're super skilled they're a necessity on higher difficulties. On the action side of things, you have a wide variety of spells to blast at the horrors lurking in the dark. Your starting weapon won't do much though. It is one of the most pitiful attacks I've ever seen in a video game, Ice Breath. This undiminishing attack requires you to go up close to enemies and breathe on them. It is weak and a little weird for the uninitiated, but you'll soon discover more useful weapons by collecting magical artifacts known as Terre Angriel. The most plentiful of these is the Dart, a quick burst of energy that projects directly in front of you. You can also find fireballs that will give more damage, even doing some to those within its blast radius, which may include you. And then there's a selection of homing balls of energy, and much more. The variety is certainly unique, and a fresh of breath air. When the alternatives tended to only carry variations of rifles, rocket launchers and laser pistols, the variety is certainly unique and a fresh of breath air, and very much welcome. The levels themselves are all nothing short of spectacular in my eyes. It really shows off what the Unreal Engine could do at the time. From real-time lighting effects to high-resolution texture work and level geometry, it all holds up remarkably well to this day. Only the cardboard cutout trees and bushes really show their age. Each area has a presence to them, feeling less like a level and more like a location. You begin in the lush setting of the Manetherendrel riverbanks, before entering the creepy, crumbling streets of the fallen city of Shadar Logoth. You'll later venture into other areas familiar to those who've read the books or seen the show, and it's interesting to see how they compare. While much more up my alley than the usual first-person shooter fare, these unique design choices are perhaps a little off-putting to action gamers coming off the likes of Unreal, Sin or Thief. Even those fresh from the narrative-driven Half-Life could conceivably balk at the sudden introduction of strategic elements. In my eyes, this is exactly what makes Wheel of Time special. It dares to be different in a setting I personally can't get enough of, And if you share my tastes, get ready for one of the most underrated games of the 90s, a must-play in my eyes. So these are just 5 games out of the 15 I've covered in December. From Lemmings to The Lion King, P.Y.S.T and Elvira, more have emerged from the deepest confines of the collection chamber. So head on over there to check them out for yourself. Remember to please like, share and subscribe and do all the YouTube stuff if you enjoy my content. Perhaps ring that bell when you do so you know when my sporadically scheduled videos get uploaded. I also have a Patreon too if you really like that sort of thing. That's it for now, stay safe and I'll see you next time on the Collection Chamber.